welcome to City Legal. It is fantastic to see you all here today, especially those who are in the room, and a special welcome to those who are online. And if this is your first time at City Legal, can I extend to you a very warm welcome. It is great to have you here. Our City Legal community exists to look at the big questions in life, and we do that by looking at God's Word. We look at that by looking at what the Bible has to say about these big questions. The format is a 20-minute talk followed by a 20-minute Q&A. During the talk, you can submit questions either to the number on your outline or on the pieces of paper that have been provided, or you can simply put your hand up at the end and Stephen will come around with a microphone and we'll take the questions from the floor. If you want to give feedback, you can do it via the Q&A code. If you're online, you can use the Q&A code for feedback, or you can submit questions via the chat function. It's my very great pleasure this morning to welcome our speaker, Simon Manchester. Simon, if you've got a moment, we need to, well, we don't initiate you, but it's wonderful to welcome you here today. Simon, you've been a minister for a number of years.
That's true, yes. I became a minister in 1980, so 42.
And a Sydney High old boy.
Yeah, like George, we're both from Sydney High.
We could do the war cry if you wanted us to.
the old song.
Simon played on the wing in a GPS winning first 15. Those were in the days when High actually had a rugby team. That was fantastic. So tell us, Simon, you're retired. Must be great. How's the handicap? On the beach, what are you up to?
Well, the handicap is me. I have 3 part-time jobs.
Yes.
So I work in a little church in the eastern suburbs a couple of days. I work with students at Moore College a couple of days, and I work with students out at Rudy Hill a couple of days. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I'm sort of stimulated and satisfied.
Is it true that Christians never retire?
I guess there must be a variety. Some people look very sleepy to me, but I'm thankful for jobs.
Oh, isn't that great? And what do you, when you look back on your ministry, what, I suppose highlight's not the right word to use, but you know, what great impressions are you left with?
I think the great privilege was to stay in one place for a long time, open God's Word, try and explain it, and watch the Word move into people's minds, hearts, families, lives, and bear lots of good fruit. I felt like I was just a farmer sowing seed and up came plants. It was wonderful.
From what I've heard, you've had a pretty good harvest.
Well,
the Lord has had a pretty good harvest through your work.
I'm thankful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, look, you're going to speak to us today about the lost son.
Yeah.
Lisa's going to come up and read the Bible.
Great.
And then you're on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Hi, I'm reading from Luke 15. Jesus tells a parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So the man divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much for the welcome. It's a great privilege to come, and I hope that these few minutes could actually be helpful for you at the beginning of your day. I remember a story which I quite enjoy of three men who are captured by terrorists, and before they're to be killed, they're given the opportunity of saying a few words. One is an Englishman, one's a Canadian, and one's an American. You need to remember that Canadians can be very politically correct. And the Englishman says, I would like to speak about loyalty and service to the Queen before I die. And the Canadian says, I would like to speak about constitutional process, unique status, distinct society, and unity within diversity. And the American says, please shoot me before the Canadian starts speaking. And I sometimes feel like that when I get up to speak, that there might be somebody who says, please shoot me before he starts speaking. I've been asked to say a few words on this very famous story of the prodigal son. And this particular story has inspired paintings, sculpture, songs, books. There are whole books written on this particular short story that Lisa just read. I want to suggest to you that this short parable of 22 verses actually explains the world we're in. So I don't know whether you have a key to the world in your head. I don't know whether you've got a little password which says, this is why the world is as it is. But the story of the prodigal son is that key. It is that password. It explains the world. I was reading through the week that G.K. Chesterton, the author of the Father Brown Mystery Series, was sliding into pessimism, and his worldview was about to be very dark. And he was stopped in his tracks, seeing a dandelion. And he said to himself, whatever worldview, whatever philosophy I adopt, it's got to take into consideration the good as well as the bad. And he found that Christianity was the perfect key for assessing the world as it really is. And this parable explains the world. And I want to just consider it with you by thinking about the three people in the parable. There are three characters. There's, as we know, a younger brother, there's an older brother, and there's a father. And I thought we would begin by thinking for a minute about the older brother, who is the least noticed member of this parable, the easily forgotten older brother. More than a third of the parable is devoted to the older brother. I don't know if you noticed as Lisa was reading, the last 8 verses of 22 have to do with this older brother. And this older brother has no time for celebrating rat bags. He has no interest in homecomings or what we might call conversions. They don't interest him. 3 weeks ago, I caught COVID, and the symptoms, as you know, vary. And I had my own set of weird symptoms. when people would ask me how I was so miserable that I would say to them, my COVID has gone to the top of the world crises at the moment. You know, there's the Ukraine and there's the floods, and then there are these random deaths that seem to be taking place, but my COVID has gone to the top. Now, friends, it is a terrible thing, isn't it, that I could think like that? But I'm perfectly capable of thinking like that. I'm the sort of person who can say, my misery takes precedence over everything. I don't have time for anything else. It's just my misery. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're not the same. Jesus told this story to this group of people around him who were deeply interested in themselves. They had no great interest in anybody else. It didn't interest them that other people would be brought home. It didn't interest them that somebody would be, inverted commas, saved. And this parable is really to the religious had no interest in the Son of God. They had no interest in the Word of God. They had no interest in the will of God. For them, their religion, their rituals, their behavior was God. And if I might say to you, having been in the church for 42 years, some of the nastiest people I've ever met have been fixated on their religion with no great interest in God. These people have no appreciation for the disconnect that people experience from God. And they have no appreciation for the connect that comes back to God. It just doesn't interest them. They're only interested in themselves and their religion. One writer says, if you want to know why there are so few prodigals in the pews of the churches, it's because there are so many older brothers in the pews of the churches. I think that's a devastating comment. I remember in ministry a man coming up to me after a sermon when I told the story of Chuck Colson in the 70s, one of Nixon's Watergate men becoming a Christian. And this man in the pew was outraged that somebody who'd been so reprehensible could possibly become a Christian. And for him, this was disgusting and it couldn't happen and it shouldn't happen. And the reason he was talking like this is because he just didn't understand anything about Christianity. He was a proud, lost man. But there is somebody in the universe who is thrilled when people come back to him, and that's God himself. And he's thrilled when the most terrible people come to him. But we have to be honest, first of all, as we think about the older brother and recognize that we're not that great at being thrilled when people come to God. We're just not that great. The older brother is a deeply searching mirror on our condition. The second brother, of course, is the more famous, the reckless brother, the younger brother who goes off with the inheritance and wastes it. There's more than a third of the parable about the younger brother. And believe it or not, this younger brother represents the human race, because the story of the human race is a human race walking out on its maker. If you go to the beginning of the Bible, you've got basically the first couple saying to God, we don't really want to have anything to do with you. We just want everything that we can possibly get. And they eventually walk out, or they're driven out of God's friendship. And that's what this boy does. This boy goes to his father and says, I would like everything, but I don't want you. And what the boy has done, the world has done. I don't think you and I will ever understand ourselves or our news or our television or our world unless we realize that what's happening with this younger brother is what's happened with the world. The walk out of God, the walk out from God, which this boy exercises. So when he says to his father, please give me my stuff because I'm finished with you, that's what the human race is like with God. God doesn't compare with the good life. And I think actually parents sometimes understand this. I don't know how many of you are parents, but you know what it's like sometimes to have a child who you're feeding and you're housing and you're educating, and they actually have begun to dislike you and to not relate to you and would be happy to see the back of you. It's a very painful experience. This boy, of course, has received everything from the Father. He should be deeply grateful. He's received his existence from the Father. He's received his security from the Father. He's received all his supplies from the Father. But he now comes to the point of saying, the Father is expendable. I just want the stuff. Like the human race says, we don't want the giver, we just want the gifts. And I imagine most of the people in my street who I try to keep up friendship with, some of them actually are lovely people in my street and believing people. But there are many people in my street and I look at them and I think, how can you have nothing to do with the giver, but just appreciate the gifts? Do you not recognize that all these wonderful gifts that have come to you have come from the giver? As if God is the roadblock to life, as if God is the big spoiler of life. It's a great, great tragedy. Sometimes when I'm in summer swimming at Bondi Beach, I'm standing there in this beautiful turquoise water, like a swimming pool. And everybody around me, especially the tourists, are absolutely loving this. And I want to say to them, although I don't speak all the languages, is this not wonderful? And who made this? If somebody made this so beautiful, could they not be wonderful? But here we are, we're in this strange world that takes hold of everything that it wants without being interested in the person who gave it to us. And the abuse that God receives from the human race, I think, is the worst abuse in the world. We talk about different abuses, but the way God is abused is the worst abuse of all. Not just sad, but shameful. So I'm suggesting to you that not only is there a great deal to learn from the older brother about being resentful, but there is a great deal to learn from the younger brother about being reckless. Sometimes kids come to their senses. They come back to their parents and they say after a long time, I'm sorry, I've been so terrible. It's a lovely moment for parents. And sometimes people come to their senses as well. They go back to God with apology and they say, I'm so sorry. I've been such an idiot, trying to live as if you were not real. Well, you see that for this younger brother, he's reckless while his funds last. That, of course, is the case, isn't it? If everything's going well, why would you want to change anything? But when his funds start to run out, everything changes for him. The amazing thing about God is that he can actually cause the funds of people to run out. Think of the people who are in the city at the moment, whose life is going pretty well. They've got lots of money, family is okay, they've got their holidays planned, they can really do whatever they want, they can buy whatever they want. It's sometimes the kindness of God to bring that success down to its knees. Sometimes God uses illness to do it, sometimes he uses a family tragedy, sometimes he uses the break of a relationship, sometimes he uses the end of work, sometimes he brings across the path some sheer facts which change the brain. C.S. Lewis said once, when God comes to the average person and knocks at the door, the average person says to God, not today. And so C.S. Lewis said, what will God do when the average person is saying to God, not today? He won't walk away because he still is committed to the welfare of the person. He won't knock on the door again because they're not answering the door. C.S. Lewis said he may take out the back wall or remove the central staircase. Not because he doesn't love the person, because he does love the person. He wants to move in and turn what C.S. Lewis called their shack into a palace. And God is able to bring a person back to their senses. And this boy comes back to his senses in the parable. And his prayer, his word to his father is exactly right. He says, I've sinned. And I've sinned against heaven. And I've sinned against you. And I'm not worthy to be called your son. It's a very, very good prayer. It's filled with honesty and filled with humility and filled with reality. And he makes no excuses. He doesn't go back and say, you've got to understand, Father, I needed to express and explore myself. He doesn't go back to the father and says, it wasn't my fault. It was the older brother. I couldn't bear living with him. He just goes back and says, it's my fault. I've done exactly the wrong thing. And that's when the father runs down the road, recognizing this is a genuine return, and wraps his arms around him and starts the feast. I don't know if you know the name Bertrand Russell, but Bertrand Russell was one of the great atheists of the 20th century. And he was so committed or hostile to Christianity, that he actually started a school so that his children would not be infected with Christianity. When his daughter Kate became a Christian, she said there were two things that really helped me. One was the doctrine of sin, according to the Bible. She said, I suddenly realized here was something which explained me. I didn't have to pretend I was wonderful. Here was the doctrine of sin in the Bible, telling me this is what you're like. And I thought, yes, this is what I'm like. And the other was the doctrine of the fatherhood of God. She said, suddenly I discovered through Christ a father, a heavenly father, who loved me exactly as I was and didn't want me to be a certain way in order to be loved. And so her Christian life came by grasping not only the problem in her heart, but also the great response and love of God. And so thirdly, there is the remarkable father. The resentful son is the older brother, the reckless son is the younger brother, and the remarkable father. And there are 5 verses devoted to the father's response. How long did the father wait for his boy to come home? I have no idea how long he waited. I don't know whether it was days, weeks, months, or years. My son is in the wilderness spiritually at the moment. He's 36 today. We've been waiting a few years for him to return. How long does a father wait for a person to come back? And when the father sees the boy, he doesn't run down the road with a lecture. He doesn't run down the road with any anger. He runs down the road with a wonderful, compassionate heart. And he considers this return of his son to be the shift from death to life. You wonder whether, don't you, whether that's an exaggeration? Wouldn't it be better if he just said, oh, he's home? But he doesn't. He says he's gone from death to life. And this is a very profound thing, because if you're separated from God, it isn't a small thing. It isn't a safe thing. It isn't even a sensible thing. It's a serious thing. It's a life and death thing. A person who's separated from God and is walking through this world with no friendship with God, what happens when the door of your life closes and you're separated from God? You're separated forever from God. It's a very, very real and serious thing. And therefore, to come back to him is to move from death to life. Well, this parable, friends, doesn't tell us everything that the Bible tells us. It doesn't tell us how come there is a road back to the Father. Because the road back to the Father is actually a very expensive road. Somebody had to arrange a road back to the Father, and the Father arranged the road back to himself. The point I'm trying to make of this is that when you separate yourself from God, the penalty for separating yourself from God is you're separated from God. Can you fix that? We are not able to fix that. We cannot go to God and say, I'll make it up to you. We cannot go to God and say, it was a nothing. We cannot go to God and say it was somebody else's fault. Only God can fix up the separation. And the way that God has fixed up the separation is to find somebody who will pay for your separation. And the person who has paid for our separation is Jesus. And the way in which Jesus has paid for our separation is to be separated. And at the cross, when he died, you'll remember, he called out, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you separated yourself? Why am I banished? And the answer, of course, is that God has taken our case and laid it on his Son, who has paid the consequences, so that we might have a return safely and surely to the Father. Somebody has to pay for that crime. Christ has paid. The return to God has been paid for by Christ. The privilege for the human race is to take as a gift this return, this safe coming, this homecoming. Well, God is interested in both his boys. He's interested in the resentful boy. He wants the resentful boy to be in the feast. He doesn't want him to be angry, resentful, bitter, pleased with himself. He wants him to be in the joyful feast, and he wants the son to be in the joyful feast, and he's so glad to have him home. With no questions asked, he's so glad to have him home. Last week, I met with the doctor for lunch, and she asked if we could meet and talk. She said, I've become a Christian. And I said to her, what is it that caused you to become a Christian? And she said, I've been in medicine for a few years, and I've been in the New Age branch of medicine, encouraging people in all sorts of New Age medicine. And she said, deep down, I've known that it's not working. And she said, out of the blue, my friend in England who led me into the New Age movement rang me and said, from England, I've become a Christian. The New Age movement that we've been a part of for such a long time is a dead end. And I'm telling you that the only solution is to go back to Christ. And so this doctor who I met with last week started to read her Bible and became a Christian reading her Bible. And she said to me, not only do I want to know how to grow, but she said, I want to know how to help the people who I have pointed to dead ends because they're on my conscience. And I think I want to say to you on the basis of the parable of the prodigal son that every single road is a dead end. But Christ, who described himself as the way, the truth and the life, is not the dead end, but the way back to God and the way back to life and the way back to joy. And I hope that you will take from this very wonderful and famous story the reminder that there is great hope for us, whatever our condition, if we will come to our senses and return, and the Father will run down the street and welcome us most warmly. Well, would you like to raise any things that I've raised?
Yes, Simon, I think we've got a lot of people who are anxious to ask you some questions. Just the first one that came in, you talked about having to, or that God can take things off you in order to bring you from death to life. Does that mean that we need to give up everything that we regard as being precious in this life in order to move from death to life?
That's a great question. I think in Australia, we think we're on the QE2 and that everything is just pretty good. Although increasingly, I notice things are getting bleak. In actual fact, we are on the Titanic, and it's God who wakes us up to see that we are on the Titanic. Now, when it comes to waking us up, as I mentioned, it's because of his great love for us. That's why he does it. He knocks away some of our crazy props. But when we do become a Christian, it is not a matter of throwing everything you have away. It's a matter of making sure everything you have is below or under the importance of Christ. I'll just mention that again to you, George. When it comes to the things that we have and enjoy, it's not a matter of removing everything we own. It's a matter of making sure nothing is a rival to Christ.
So are you saying that it's a question of our priorities, a question of our perspective on life?
I think part of coming to your senses is to realise that the most important person in the universe is Christ, and everything else must take second place.
Fantastic answer. That's great. Should we try to discover more about what is going on in the world by travel or even listening to the radio or searching the internet overnight? How do you find out more about the world?
Well, I think you, dear people, you live in the real world, and you probably see enough of the real world. They used to say that doctors see people as they are, lawyers see people at their worst, and clergy see people at their best, or something like that. And so I've no doubt that you're realists when it comes to the human race. And the longer you live in this world, the more you realise that the biblical diagnosis is correct. That the key problem is a vertical problem of turning away from God, and everything basically falls apart after that. Yeah. And the solution is a vertical solution. It's to come back to him and find that many things then fall into place.
So is this a great, I mean, are you offering an answer to what we might call the anxiety of the world?
I think when Jesus says, come to me, all you who are labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's a very profound thing he's saying. He's basically saying to the human race, you've lost your rest, you've lost your Sabbath, you've lost your peace, but when you come to me, that will begin again. Yeah.
It's a wonderful picture. Okay. You said the father could recognize that the younger son's return was real. What if you're not even sure if your own return is real?
I suspect the father, full of compassion, looking down the road and seeing the boy come home, either was full of compassion just because he was coming home, or could recognize something in his walk that he was a broken boy, and therefore he was glad to welcome him. The lovely thing about this father running down the road is that he's offering to the boy big open arms. When it comes to our own return to God, how do we make sure that's genuine? Well, I don't think we need to we don't need to beat ourselves up about this. I think an honest prayer to God is all we need to be offering. When Jesus died on the cross, there were two thieves, one each side, and one of them simply said to him, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said, you'll be with me in my kingdom. Now, that wasn't a great prayer.
That's an astounding thing to say.
Yeah, it wasn't a very polished Elizabethan prayer. It was just, remember me. And
great encouragement.
Yeah, and there's a lovely verse in the Bible that says the one who calls on the Lord will be saved. It doesn't take a lot to call on the Lord.
No.
It's like drowning in the surf at Bondi. You know, your hand goes up, it's humiliating. The man in blue runs out, grabs you. That's all you've done, really.
Yeah. All right. We have some questions from the floor.
Simon, George would like to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is about, you just now said that tries to change people's resentment into joys. So what about the consciousness of people? Because they can also do this in some extent. What's the difference?
Yeah, thank you. There is a human shift, isn't there, that takes place where we may be cast down and then we sort of change our mind, think positively and try to be more hopeful and more happy. But there are limits to that. I think what I'm talking about is that God creates in the heart a brand new perspective, a brand new life, a brand new hope, a brand new joy, which is forever. And it's unrelated to circumstances. If I could just give you a simple illustration, when Noah and his wife and family got into the ark, they say it was stormy outside and it was stinky inside, but he was safe. He knew where he was. He knew where he was going from one shore to the next. When you come to Jesus, it doesn't mean that everything is going to be solved. It doesn't mean even the world will be easy, but you belong to somebody who is going to keep you safe from this shore to the next. And that is a different kind of, it's not a superficial, it's a profound change.
Thank you. Can I have the second folio? Okay.
Only two per customer.
Sorry, Sean. Okay. You also mentioned that God will use different things to unite people, such as illness or even evil or war. What about the COVID and the war?
It would be great, wouldn't it, if everybody who had been threatened with COVID or had COVID came to their senses and said, gee, I'm mortal and I need to wake up to myself. I think there is a great tragedy in the many, many ways that God rattles our cage, but we don't respond to him. And in this country, what do we do when our cage gets rattled with flood or COVID? We just say, we'll solve it. And so we never look up. We never really come to our senses. We just pat ourselves on the back. That's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. I mean, just imagine millions of people coming before God and them saying to him, why didn't you give me more information? And he says, well, not only did I put you in a country where the message of Christ was ringing out all over the place, not only did I put you inside a creation to tell you there's a creator, but I rattled your cage here and here and here and here so you'd come to your senses, and you never did. It's a tragedy.
We have one more question.
Sorry, I was just going to make a comment that it reminds me of a South African bishop who was visiting Australia. I don't think he'd been here before this, and he looked around and he summed up Australia as being a very dangerous place to live because everything was so good.
Yeah, having said that, there's a sign on one of the churches down George Street, and it's one of those church posters. I walked past it yesterday, and it says something like, since everything is getting so dark, is it not time for us to turn back to the light? And there is a picture of the Bible. Your word is a lamp to my feet. And perhaps that poster is expressing also what many people in Australia are thinking, which is that things are getting pretty dark. The big $64,000 question is, will we look inside, which is not the way, or will we look around, which is not the way, or will we look up, which could be the way?
Simon, a question from Will.
Simon, thanks. That was fantastic talk. Just lately, I've experienced and just express it with everybody else in this room, a profound sense of peace. I understand where you're coming from now, and people said, what is it like to be with God and Christ? And sorry, I don't want to sound like an evangelical, but what I'm experiencing, just going through a couple of things in life, some people know about it, but what I could explain is it's almost impossible, but peace and joy, I think, but more so peace. And it's just peace I give you, my peace amongst you. So my question is, if I'm feeling this way, how can I guess, communicate amongst a lot of friends? We probably have a lot of mutual friends in the eastern suburbs, millionaires, some of them billionaires that play golf with. I mean, it'd be very, I guess, how do I reach out? Because I feel an obligation now to spread the word. Again, sorry, I'm not saying I'm an evangelical in a way, but I think I'm under an obligation now to express how I'm feeling and the relationship I have with God and Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, that is a great question, and you should feel free to call yourself an evangelical, because that simply means you believe the good news. Yeah. So just a quick word to you. There is a peace which is a fact. The peace which is a fact is where God has arranged a peace with himself through Jesus, which we take hold of, and we have that peace forever. We are at peace with God. We will meet him one day face to face, as the Bible says, without fault and with great joy. That is a fantastic thing. And it is fixed in all the ups and the downs. However, there is also the peace of a feeling which can come and go. And every real believer has a fixed peace with God that will never break, but also the feelings which come and go. My answer to your question about being a wise witness to Jesus, a signpost to Jesus, is in Colossians chapter 4, which I think is the great passage to help most of you who live in the real world and are not crazy clergy who give talks and lots of chatter. And Colossians chapter 4, 2-6 simply says this: live wisely among the unbelievers, make the most of every opportunity. You're not at work to preach, but you do have opportunities to answer. And therefore, as you live wisely and certain parts of your old life disappear, whether it's nastiness, criticism, blasphemy, language, those sort of things disappear, people will notice things and they may ask questions. They may even say, what did you do this week? And you seek to give just a sensible, brief answer. It's been a pretty ordinary week, but I went to a breakfast for believers on Thursday, and that was helpful. That's all you say. And Paul says, answering is a very great way of being a signpost. It's not preaching at people. It's just answering questions which come up all the time. And he says, do it with salt, so it's not too boring, and grace, so it's not too abrasive. Colossians 4, 2-6. Thank you.
What a great encouragement. Just two more we've got here, unless somebody else has got a question they'd like to ask from the floor. I was about to read your question, please.
This could avoid the illegibility of it.
Oh, okay.
In place of it,
I can pin this?
Yeah, you can pin it. It takes on from Will's question, and it may be answered by saying Colossians 4:2-6, but for friends who seem to be self-satisfied, is it wiser for us to wait for a circumstance to come, or to keep needling?
That's not what this said.
Christ, I know. It's been refined.
Okay.
Ian, I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face, is how do we actually get under the skin of the person who's perfectly happy? And I don't know if I have anything very clever to say. I think part of it is loving people, praying that little doors will open, and then sometimes over coffee, just taking up the opportunity to say, everything seems to be great. Have you got a bigger hope than just the next few years or something? In other words, finding a way that's true to you, but raises bigger questions.
Please join me in thanking Simon. We've heard a wonderfully encouraging talk this morning. Can I just draw your attention before we go to the program of talks, which is included in the papers that you've got. Our format at the moment is that we're meeting here each fortnight. So our next meeting here is on the 26th of May, when David Auld will be returning to complete his series, The Confessions of a Vapor, which is from the book of Ecclesiastes. After that, we've got Dr. Peter Jensen coming for a couple of weeks. Many of you know Peter well. He's spoken here many times, former Archbishop of Sydney, and he's always challenging, as you know. The other thing that we do here at City Legal is our small groups, our hope groups. And these hope groups meet each alternate Thursday at the Astray Cafe. They're small groups, usually 4 to 6 people around a table, looking at a part of God's word, encouraging each other and helping each other as we too strive to be better equipped to provide an answer for the hope that we hold. So if you'd like to join a hope group, you can do so via the QR code, or you can simply shoot Peter an email, and we would love it if you could join us there. If this is your first time and you're not on our system, you'll find a form there where you can tell us a bit about you and how we can contact you and let you know what's happening in City Legal. So until we see you in a fortnight, thank you for being here. It's a joy to see so many of you, and it's also a joy to have people online. We want to thank you all for participating in our ministry, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.